The Great Migration spawned many of the greatest novels of the 20th century, and at the center, Richard Wright set the terms to which others reacted. They supported them, rejected them, or wrote right past them. This is the story of an era and a generation of writers. It begins in 1915. America had not yet entered World War I, but intense warfare in Europe cut off migratory flows from Europe. In the North, industry began recruiting black workers from the South. And given the harsh segregationist violence there, opportunities in the North seemed to override the South's disadvantages. So, folks began to pack up and leave for northern cities, and the flow would not slow until 1970s. But the move north didn't come without its own difficulties. The sudden geographical and cultural shifts fractured families, severed traditions, and introduced typically rural populations to densely packed cities. With these changes came new struggles and fresh disagreements. And many of the prominent novels from the period were there to document and frame the collisions. For this episode, we'll be discussing themes from 5 of the best Great Migration novels. You'll have heard of a few of these familiar favorites, but several of these will likely be brand new for you. That's the goal with these episodes. We'll find new ways to see old books and also get recommendations for others you may not know. After you've watched this episode, tell our community which books were new for you and which books should also actually be on this list. Stay tuned and post your answers in the comments. First, one of the best nonfiction books of the past several decades, bar none, is about this era. And it's our source for many of the common themes we'll find in our 5 novels. The nonfiction book is by Isabel Wilkerson, who won the Pulitzer Prize for The Warmth of Other Suns. What makes this book accessible to a popular audience? It's not a dry history. Rather, Wilkerson prefers narrative form, and she conveys significant experiences within this multi-decade odyssey. For our purposes, she provides us with several ideas and themes that help us condense the Great Migration's really surprising depth and weight. This gives us great context for our 5 novels. So let's take a look at what happened to American cities. Several staggering changes include, in Chicago, they went from 1.8% black population at the start of the Great Migration to 1/3 of the population by 1970. This means that by the end, Chicago had a larger black population than all of Mississippi. Detroit jumped even further. At the beginning, Detroit had a 1.4% black population, and they jumped to 44% black population. This story plays out again and again across other northern cities like New York, Cleveland, St. Louis, and many others. The movement of the Great Migration stretches as far as Los Angeles, which is where one of our novels is actually set. Such monumental demographic changes to both the South and the North forever alter the social and political fabric of both regions. But the changes are not just demographic. Some of the most celebrated writers of the time express striking social, cultural, and political threads over several novels. And their words define many of the 20th century's most dramatic literary collisions. Among many writers around the Great Migration, Richard Wright, he simply looms large. His Blueprint article from 1937, and also his subsequent writing, it really forms the center of gravity during this period. While not all of this list's authors directly address his positions, much of what was written at the time orbits the discourse he outlines. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. His essay is intended to provoke. So he begins by writing the blueprint essay, quote, "Negro writing in the past has been confined to humble novels, poems, and plays. Prim and decorous ambassadors who went begging to white America." This quote is the article's first line, and it remarks on the view that Black writing up to this time of this essay has been written to appeal to white America rather than Black audiences. And just so that we understand this statement's significance, the criticism he was giving was intended for the Harlem Renaissance. Wright proposes Black literature for Black audiences, and he calls for a response from new literature, a more socially conscious and responsible form of writing. He continues later in the article, and I quote, "The Negro writer who seeks to function within his race as a purposeful agent has a serious responsibility in order to do justice to his subject matter, in order to depict Negro life in all of its manifold and intricate relationships. A deep, informed, and complex consciousness is necessary. A consciousness which draws for its strength upon the fluid lore of a great people, and molds this lore with the concepts that move and direct the forces of history today." That is some good writing. Now, Wright is most known for his passages like this. He advocates for Black literature that engages problems within the community and uplifts social consciousness. That is, he wants writers to use literature for protest. Richard Wright's ideas inspire writers of this generation, and in some form, they carry over to other novels in the future. We wouldn't have, for example, a Toni Morrison, a Percival Everett, Colson Whitehead, or a Yaa Gyasi if it weren't for Wright's push for social consciousness. And for that matter, books that do more than just tell a story. Wright's philosophy is suited to the Great Migration. All of these themes we find in his work directly address the ills of the time period. Among many issues, Black populations moved north to find jobs, but when no longer convenient, people were just left unemployed. More broadly, the opportunities that are promised to migrating peoples do not fully materialize. Wright's literary philosophy steps in to meet these social crises. For this reason, Richard Wright favors a kind of writing called social realism. It gains importance within the 1930s and beyond that even. Taking many of their ideas from the Chicago School of Sociology, Wright and others emphasize these points: urban working class people and their plight, lost faith in northern cities' opportunities, flawed characters with often tragic arcs, and finally, social determinism, which is a belief wherein the social environment defines one's own physical and behavioral outcomes. Social realism portrays bleakness, poverty, and division in the North. Through their writing, authors seek to effect change in these conditions on a broad national scale. 2 novels in our list, 2 out of 5 in fact, they adopt social realism. The first should come as no surprise: Richard Wright's most famous novel, Native Son. You can see it behind me here. Social determinism drives the plot of that novel, while the protagonist, Bigger Thomas, is flawed and frustratingly so. His fate is more so shaped by a storm of circumstances, and these conditions push him toward his conclusions. The novel's first scene demonstrates the character of Bigger's 20-year-old life. Readers are introduced to his family as they chase a rat around a tiny apartment. Ultimately, he and his brother corner the rat, and Bigger smashes it and kills it with a skillet. Bigger is noticeably shaken, and it reveals the novel's larger point. Bigger, for all of his strength and bravado, is out of his depth, yet he maintains a mask of masculinity as a source of power. He is both hunter and the rat. He seeks confrontation because he is the hunter, but he is also the rat because all of these larger forces conspire to control his life and death. His mother sees this trajectory, so she forces him to get a steady job as a chauffeur for the wealthy white family, the Dalton family. He soon learns that the Daltons are also his landlord, and they're also responsible for the high rents in Chicago in his neighborhood. However, the Daltons, they donate to causes to uplift black students and give, quote, poor black boys jobs. Here's a twisted logic that governs Bigger's life. Mr. Dalton thinks of himself as a philanthropist, but he profits from a system that keeps people like Bigger and his family in poverty. And while he gives Bigger a job, he's also an architect of the ghetto that Bigger can't seem to escape. Hunter, rat, repeat. Wright's broader implication describe a common circumstance for too many new arrivals in the so-called promised land in the North. Social realism is this tool for Wright that expedites his diagnosis of its problems. Chester Himes, a good friend of Wright's, similarly affects his own books with social realism. While the author may best be known for his Harlem detective series, the novel If He Hollers, Let Him Go is among his most well-respected literary ventures, and it arguably represents his best depiction of the Great Migration. With it, Himes pushes Wright's terms further. Like Wright's Bigger Thomas, Himes's protagonist, Robert Bob Jones, is subject to the forces around him. And like Bigger, Bob has a number of personality, let's say, obstacles that push him toward a tragic trajectory. But this isn't a deep dive, so I'm not going to reveal the ending for you. Don't worry. In the book, it's the 1940s, and Jones works at the Los Angeles Naval Shipyard as an established crew supervisor. This position is at the center of resentment for his white subordinates. At the start, Bob is already consumed by an ambient anxiety, which sends his thoughts into violent revenge fantasies against his white colleagues. The protagonist confronts a number of conflicts, including supervising a white woman whose name is Madge, and he also has to navigate his relationship with his own girlfriend, Alice, whose wealth and light skin put her in close proximity with Los Angeles's white upper class. Bob, on the other hand, is constantly being reminded he's an outsider. Himes ratchets up the pressure as the novel progresses, and Bob's mounting resentment and anxiety pull him into a spiral beyond his control that threatens to destroy his life. Himes' social realism pits his protagonist against the forces unleashed by the Great Migration. Bob, he's an established leader, but he's the first black crew supervisor on this job. So the position's novelty that he has speaks to the dynamics many black workers faced, being new, black, and in the North with unspoken and sometimes even contradictory racial rules. The mix of social factors reproduces the era's social volatility in this novel. The values that Wright expresses in his article, the Blueprint article, gain wide support, but that also sets the stage for lots of disagreement. Zora Neale Hurston and James Baldwin, for example, have some pretty public disagreements with Wright. James Baldwin comes later. In a review for the New Masses, Wright calls Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God unserious fiction. And he writes, Miss Hurston can write, but her prose is cloaked in that facile sensuality that has dogged Negro expression since the days of Phyllis Wheatley. The sensory sweep of her novel carries no theme, no message, no thought. Harsh. In her own review of Wright's Uncle Tom's Children, Hurston writes, "This is a book about hatreds. Mr. Wright serves notice by his title that he speaks of people in revolt. And his histories are so grim that the dismal swamp of race hatred must be where they live. Not one act of understanding and sympathy comes to pass in the entire work." Now, meanwhile, James Baldwin, who's a former friend, later in the century expresses a central disagreement many writers take with Wright's work. In his article, Everybody's Protest Novel, Baldwin includes Wright's native son in a tradition with Uncle Tom's Cabin. He writes that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that protest fiction, that is Wright's class of novels, its characteristics simplify and undermine human understanding in favor of employing political symbols. Baldwin's argument underscores a larger debate in the literature of the Great Migration about what's called interiority, or what we might call inner life, life of the mind. It's an argument about priorities and the ways that other authors on this list choose to express Black experience from this era, the Great Migration. By some authors' standards, Wright's social realism is dogmatic, and where Hurston and Baldwin argue with his terms, the next writers we're going to talk about choose to write around them. Gwendolyn Brooks is one of them. She's mostly known for poetry, but her novel Maud Martha, it leans more lyric, like poetry, than either of the previous two authors. The form suits her novel very well. Her book progresses in vignettes rather than straight narrative, and it focuses heavily on scenery and image. The effect of this is that her book is a more intimate reflection and more empathetic. This sets her apart from Richard Wright tradition, and it gives her writing a more hopeful outlook on the culture of the Great Migration. Brooks' focus downplays action and distills moments like this. But dandelions were what she chiefly saw. Yellow jewels for every day, studying the patch green dress of her backyard. She liked their demure prettiness second to their everydayness. For in the latter quality, she thought she saw a picture of herself. And it was comforting to find that what was common could also be a flower. The novel's perspective takes advantage of her character's inner life, interiority. The language is thoughtful and careful, like main character herself, Maud. In its interiority, the narrative seems to refute the pessimism found in Wright's social realism, which it absolutely does, because Brooks includes a scene about mid-novel, and the chapter or section is called Maud Martha Spares a Mouse. Remember the rat? This scene inverts Wright's rat scene in Native Son. Rather than distilling a threat and killing a rat, Brooks' language de-escalates the mouse's menace, and she actually enlivens the creature. Prior critics have argued that this scene typifies Brooks's own critique of social realism. In fact, find it in my works cited list. In the scene, Maud traps a mouse in her apartment, but the narrative tone softens as she ponders its point of view, then her own life. She considers life more broadly and then she simply opens the trap for the mouse. She thinks to herself, a life blundered its way into her power, and it had been hers to preserve or destroy. She'd not destroyed it. In the center of that simple restraint was creation. She had created a piece of life. It was wonderful. Maud demonstrates a moment of small mercy for the mouse, and perhaps herself. Brooks subtly infuses her narrative with empathy and intimacy. This is the kind of interior life on display in her descriptions. In the broader novel, the story tracks Maud Martha's life from childhood to motherhood just before about World War II. Maud has lived in Chicago her whole life, and her story over the course of 20 years is a later but generational result of the Great Migration. Because Brooks infuses Maud's story with such pathos, the tone richly reflects on the struggling but textured lives of her characters. The mouse scene is a small sample of this inclination. A constant theme in Great Migration literature is anxiety over family and lost connections. This is absolutely present in Maud Martha. But as in other places, Brooks takes a more hopeful look into life after generations of living up north. While Brooks looks inward, Dorothy West gazes upward to affluent Black lives in Boston. Like the list's other authors, she writes about the impact of Northern life on her newly transplanted characters. Her perspective in the book The Living is Easy takes a different approach than her peers. So, I want to give you a little bit of backstory here before we get too far into the book. It provides some insight into the larger collisions between our authors. So, first, I've introduced Dorothy West in a previous video about 20 novels from African American literary history. Dorothy West is often grouped with the Harlem Renaissance, but she's viewed as one of its last figures. She's also a contemporary of Richard Wright. In fact, West publishes Wright's Blueprint article, and she brings him on as an editor of a famous literary magazine called New Challenge. Although Wright's philosophy is not a direct reaction to West, his criticism certainly targets some of the literary values she shares with the Harlem Renaissance. Native Son, published 1940, and West's Living is Easy was published 1948. They address actually similar concerns about disruption to family and Southern roots. But whereas Wright confronts these issues directly, West approaches them through satire. More specifically, in this book, she tackles them through two wealthy characters who've moved from the South to Boston. This is the exact kind of bourgeois narrative that Wright often combats in his own writing. As well, I'll say this, in Brooks's Maud Martha, she deals with family and separation, but Maud is far from affluent, and the wealthy Black folks that she counters are more so criticized for at least elitist and colorist values. Now, West's depictions of her main characters, Cleo and Bart, are outliers on this list, but they're nonetheless important to present a full picture of expression in this era. The story goes like this. Cleo has detached from her family in the South and has lived in Boston. She meets Bart Judson, who is wealthy from banana imports. They get married, but Cleo sees Bart more as a means to an end. Cleo is ambitious and she disdains the South and poverty despite a past in actually both backgrounds. And here's the thing, she ironically also has this lingering desire for family and heritage. So she attempts to use Bart's money to separate her sisters from their families, and two of her sisters are from the South. And she tries to bring them up to Boston, and she actually tries to ruin their marriages in the process. Cleo wants to have things she misses from home, but have them on her own new terms with her newfound respectability and wealth. The satire is this: she pursues her goals and wealth at the expense of everything. Her chase for everything makes her more vulnerable eventually to the consequences of her own moral bankruptcy. West's skill, however, is that she makes her character's motives understandable and, dare I say, even relatable, even Cleo. And this matters. Even though The Living is Easy is published after Native Son, it is a bridge between the sentiment of the Harlem Renaissance and this new generation that Wright represents. West expresses some of the same concerns as those really after her, but simply in a different language. That gives readers a wide variety of expressions really about the same concerns. And we see some of these same themes throughout the Great Migration literature. West is a bridge between two eras. But our last novelist, Jean Toomer, builds a foundation for the literary Great Migration that no one quite knows what to do with. Cain is difficult to classify, but that's the point. This novel shares more elements with Maud Martha than really any of the other novels because, like Brooks, Toomer relies on lyricism to forward his narrative. His impressionistic style is delivered in a sequence of vignettes, poems, and longer stories. The book is pretty disturbing at times, I'll tell you that. But despite its forcefulness, it avoids direct engagement with its ideas or its criticisms. So its pervasive sense of dread is delivered more through a steady flow of discord and violence. I'm thinking of mainly one story that's disturbing, and that is Blood Burning Moon, in which a man is lynched, but also the suggestion of violence in other places like Bona and Paul. A white woman falls in love in this story with a light-skinned man, and images flit in short and sharp sequences. It's just the style that it's written in. Jean Toomer writes, Bona and Paul and Art and Helen move along an island-like, far-stretching strip of leaf-soft ground. Above them, worlds of shadow planes and solids silently moving. As if one of these, Paul looks down on Bona. No doubt about it, her face is pale. She is talking. Her words have no feel to them. One sees them. They are pink petals that fall upon velvet cloth. Bona is soft and pale and beautiful. But the ever-present threat of really getting caught together dissuades Bona from staying around Paul, and she jets. Cain's stylistic variety defies the novel's expected form. The stories and poems have really little narrative connection to one another. Rather, the connections are through theme and really kind of movement from south to north and then back to south again. And that movement echoes the familiar migratory themes of all of these other books that we've talked about. Families are disconnected. Color lines undermined. The struggles of rural and urban life isolate and oppress. Cain is by far the earliest novel in this bunch. It was published in 1923. So it's not quite in the conversation with these other books, which is clear in the text itself because it's really just so different from everything else on this list. Most of all, the book is affecting, and the impressions have staying power. These are images that you'll find yourself thinking about for a long while after reading Cain, and they carry over actually into contemporary Black fiction, into those authors that I've mentioned before. This makes Kane an ideal preview to many of the ideas discussed in this episode, because it was published about 20 years before Native Son. Less than that, but about. Wright promotes social realism as Great Migration's answers. He writes to shock and confront. But Toomer in Kane already shows us discord that could be delivered in another way. The Great Migration affected millions of lives over the century, and these novels are its expression. Wright set the conditions for the era, but others collided with his assertions. Social realism was a tool for protest, but authors found other means to express their experiences of life in the North. The era's literary variety left literature with a strong impression about justice through writing, and those ideas are still alive today. Thank you for watching. I'm Ben. This has been Tilting at Tomes.